Armed Russian jets violated US airspace over its Tanf base in Syria 25 times this month. That's according to a senior general who's been speaking to US media. Well, for more on that, we're joined now by Joel Rayburn. He's the director of the American Center for Levant Studies and a former US Special Envoy to Syria. Great to have you with us, Joel. 25 times in 1 month. Is Russia doing this on purpose?
Of course. This is part of a long pattern of the Russians attempting to pressure, to intimidate, to provoke the U.S. presence in Syria for a variety of reasons. First of all, the United States or the Russians would like the United States to leave Syria so as to have a clear field for their client Bashar al-Assad. But in particular, the Russians would like to see us leave Tanf so that the Iranians can have Tanf and have their superhighway from Baghdad to Damascus to the Golan Heights and Bekaa Valley and so on in order to make war against Israel. And because Russia and Iran are in an alliance, then this is something that the Russians have long sought to facilitate, even going back to the days of Qasem Soleimani. And it's also always, when the Russians escalate or confront like this, it often can be tied to diplomatic confrontations or other confrontations on other fronts, such as what's happening in Ukraine. This would be a way of the Russians playing a card and saying, see, we can create trouble for you. If you continue to create trouble for us in Ukraine, we can create trouble for you elsewhere.
All right, and of course, as we reported earlier in the program, Saudi Arabia is poised to embrace Bashar al-Assad. It would appear the US policy to isolate him has failed.
Well, the U.S. has two different policies going on right now. You have the one that the U.S. government bureaucracy is enforcing, which is the long-standing isolation of Assad, and that's in concert with the U.S. Congress. And then you have the U.S. White House, which seems to be quietly pursuing a different policy that they don't talk about, which is to do nothing to prevent the Arab countries and others from having these normalization outreach initiatives to Assad. I wouldn't describe it as the Saudis embracing Bashar al-Assad. I think they're holding their noses as they do whatever it is they're about to do. Reportedly, we haven't heard it directly from the Saudis themselves, so we have to take it with a grain of salt.
It is just a report at this stage. That is true. And we have talked in the past about the potential risk of a confrontation between Israel and Russia in Syria. What about the risks of a confrontation between the U.S. and Russia in Syria?
I never take those very seriously. Having been in that role of, one of the chief diplomats on the U.S. policy for Syria, every time the Russians tried to do something like this, they were forced to back down eventually because they don't actually have much to back it up. They're militarily weak. They're much weaker, for example, than U.S. CENTCOM and combined with our other allies in the region. And anytime the U.S. actually stiffens, the Russians will back down. They've done that over Tanf. They've done that when you may remember a couple of years ago when some of the Russian patrols were trying to play a game of chicken with our ground patrols in northeast Syria and run our people off the road. And our guys got tough, and the Russians had to back down because there's nothing behind it. The Russians are bluffing when they do this. But they're willing to behave recklessly, and they're willing to risk a local confrontation. But if it were to escalate, we would entirely dominate the escalation ladder with the Russians.
You see it as
and the Russians know that.
Okay, you see it as a case of all bark and no bite, as it were. Well, the US, of course, is in Syria to fight ISIS and prevent ISIS from a resurgence. Does this kind of battle with the Russians undermine that objective?
Of course, but it also shows that the Russians don't care about ISIS. The Russians don't care about the global coalition to defeat ISIS. Their larger objective is they would like to see us, the United States, and our influence and our allies expelled from the Middle East so that they can exercise the kind of role that they used to many decades ago, which they've allowed to recreate a foothold to try to do again. And that's sad. That's the state of affairs that we're in.
All right, Joel Rayburn, we'll end it there. Thank you very much indeed. Great to talk to you.
My pleasure.